I want to welcome everyone to this evening's, the second part of a two-part webinar series that began earlier today. You may have a couple of questions on your mind if you were with us earlier today. Yes, I have changed clothes since then. No, this will not be the same content. And we are so excited to hear what Dr. Dell has to share with us specifically about Black entrepreneurship and community growth in Oklahoma City. My name is Mariana Adams. I'm the Executive Director of Progress OKC. We are a not-for-profit community development corporation and emerging financial institution really created to strengthen and preserve both the social and economic fabric of under-resourced communities. We focus on housing development, business lending, and other capacity enhancement efforts. And since the start of the pandemic, about 18 months ago, we have been able to provide both technical assistance as well as zero interest loans to nearly 65 businesses in Oklahoma City. We are so excited about tonight's segment. None of our work would be possible without our partners and our collaborators. Specifically, this series being brought to you by and sponsored by the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments, which we're joined by Matt Weaver, who will share some comments here in a second, as well as the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City being a part of these two series. We will have additional series, virtual events in September, where we will discuss both financial and non-financial entrepreneur resources, as well as kind of along the lines of what we've discussed today, broader ecosystem strategies. So whether you are an economic development practitioner, community builder, leader, local business owner, other professional in media, accounting, policymakers, we're so excited to have you here today because you're a part of us really cultivating a resilient and inclusive new economy. A couple of housekeeping things. This is being recorded for you to, we'll be rebroadcasting this next week. So if you felt like you missed anything or you wanted to really re-engage in this topic, this will be shared on both Progress OKC's and ACOG's website and social media. In addition, I'm going to share some poll questions here in a little bit. I really encourage you to respond and participate in that way. And we will have some time at the end for a Q&A. Before I hand it off to Matt Weaver, I wanted to really, because this conversation is focused on Black entrepreneurship in particular, I want to share three things as it relates to some challenges, but leadership and resiliency as well. So a recent study that was commissioned by the City of Oklahoma City and in partnership, well, I should say not in partnership, but working with EY, which is a global firm. They do a ton around economic development, community development, and so much more. They found that businesses owned by people of color in Oklahoma City have fewer employees, lower sales and revenue than those owned by their white counterparts. Specifically, even when we look at ownership rates for Black and Latinx or Hispanic individuals, the business ownership rates of those individuals are not proportionate to their representative population size in Oklahoma City. You have Asian Americans and whites who are have more ownership, more ownership rates or greater ownership rates, and then Native Americans and Indigenous who are right on par. And so there's just some opportunities there that we have to really look at how do we better engage established entrepreneurs and small businesses that are looking to scale and grow and make sure that they have the resources they need. But then also those are aspiring to become entrepreneurs and open a business. How do we engage them? So that's a challenge / opportunity. Leadership wise, we were just talking about East Point. East Point is a really interesting and innovative real estate development in Northeast Oklahoma City, which is a historically African-American Black community. This project was initiated by the community with a developer, Pivot, John Dotson in particular. And if you did not know, they recently received the Urban Land Institute Global Award for Excellence. 1 in 9 across the globe, they were recognized in that way. That is only the third time that Oklahoma as a state has received that recognition. We were talking about a fantastic bar. There's an event that's happening right now. I encourage you all to stay tuned, but join us thereafter. But what you'll see is ownership that's reflected of that community, whether you have fitness, bar, retail, et cetera. It's just a fantastic project that should be recognized and is being recognized here, but is also being recognized on a global stage. So that's leadership. Resiliency-wise, last year, the city of Oklahoma City created, using CARES Act fund, the Oklahoma City Small Business Continuity Program. And what we could see from the data there is that there were a lot of small businesses that were being served. We were responding to people that were about to shut their doors, had lost revenue. We were able to fill those gaps, but we saw that there were racial disparities. And we had the data to support that, but we actually had a constituent group, specifically from Northeast Oklahoma City, Black businesses that went before the city and said, we need a program just for us. We need a program that's specifically geared towards minorities because we have unique barriers. They did that and they made that happen. And as a result of that, the city of Oklahoma City created a minority-owned business recovery program, and I was a part of that rollout. So I just want to say, as we talk about some of the challenges, opportunities, there is resiliency there. There is great leadership there. And we are just here to help guide you all and really work alongside of you all and wrap whatever resources that we can, bring whatever resources we can for it to continue to see you thrive. So with that, I will hand it off to Matt Weaver, who is our partner in this endeavor. Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, buenos tardes, howdy, and good evening, everybody. Very exciting first webinar this morning. If you weren't there and you're on today, please go back and review it. Fantastic information that Dr. Dell was sharing with us. So I'm Matthew Weaver. I'm the Manager of Community and Economic Development Division here at the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments, or ACOG. Most of the public, absolutely, probably all of the public, has no idea what a council of government is all about. We kind of are under the radar screen. We've been around since the mid-60s. We are of, by, and for the government and not the government. At the macro level, you might know us for, we're the clean air people. We put out the clean air alerts. We also run the EV coalition. And we're also responsible for tens of millions of dollars flowing through here for infrastructure needs. A lot of that is transportation. So one of the unique things about ACOG, and I've been here, it'll be 2 years here next month. My boss hired me because he's determined to take councils of governments, and in particular this council of government, to the next level, to be a better, more progressive, aggressive convener and facilitator of opportunities in the 4 counties that we serve. So what we've been doing are finding those gaps, and we're all about not being one-offs. We're about resiliency. We want systemic change. And part of the opportunities that we're working on right now is we have a workforce development grant. We're working on an industry cluster to try and actually solve a workforce dilemma here in the state. And we're also working in the middle of a minority business development grant with LISC, Local Initiative Service Corporation out of Indiana. And it's because of those gaps that ACOG says, well, where are those partners that we can make this happen? And with the Minority Business Development Grant, we discovered all sorts of things, and nothing new to anybody on this webinar, but there's this huge gap. And so it's all about, I think, building a lot of social trust with the resources that are out there that minority-owned businesses may not be familiar with. And I think Mariana hit it on the head, because what ACOG is all about, and all of the services that we provide, and I work with 50 municipalities, is if I'm not having a regular conversation about leadership development, leadership succession, leading from the heart, letting everybody lead from where they are within your community, if we're not having those discussions, it's kind of a waste of everybody's time. If you're going to come to your council of government and ask for a grant, there should be a return to the whole community on that. So when we had this opportunity to work with Progress OKC to help get the message out about resources and about opportunities, for me, it's just such a natural collaboration. We're looking forward to many more of these with Progress OKC and other minority groups in town, great relationships with the minority chambers of commerce. And hopefully, as Mariana was alluding to, joining the Black Chamber this evening for their mixer. So as representative of ACOG and this incredible staff that we have here, and our commitment to all of our communities moving forward, and our specialty is low to moderate income communities, we're really making a difference. And it can't be without collaborations like this, that we can actually all work together to move Oklahoma City in the central part of Oklahoma forward together. So thank you so much for everybody that's attending. Thank you, Mariana, for your vision and your leadership. And I'm really looking forward to Dr. Dell's conversation tonight, because he's gonna rock your brain a little bit. Thank you much. Enjoy.
Thank you, Matt. Chad, I'll throw it over to you.
Thanks, Mariana. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar tonight. My name's Chad Wilkerson. I'm the Oklahoma City branch executive for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. And it's been a pleasure for us to partner today, and I think in an ongoing process, with Progress OKC and ACOG in putting on these webinars. Just as a quick background in our Fed office here in Oklahoma City, we have about 45 employees who work to study and share about the Oklahoma economy and banking and community development efforts across our state. And our team of bank examiners also work to help ensure the safety and soundness and fair lending standards of Oklahoma banks. In regard to tonight's webinar, I just wanted to mention a few introductory thoughts. Mariana had a nice overview of some of the trends, so I won't go into some of those, but we recognize small businesses have been disproportionately hit by the pandemic, especially smaller minority-owned businesses. The Fed, as you know, has responded through supporting unique national programs like the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, but we realize that distribution and access can sometimes be difficult, especially for those most in need. So we recognize this and work to identify and address these barriers through local outreach and developing resources and approaches like you'll hear about today. Small businesses make a big difference in the Oklahoma City economy, as you know. 95% of the businesses in our metro area have less than 50 employees, and they've been a big part in driving the strong local economy we've had so far this year, with unemployment now down below 3.5% again, although still with mixed degrees of recovery across industries and demographic groups, as Mariana highlighted. So your views and experiences today are very important to us as we continue to work together on finding pathways towards full recovery for everyone in Oklahoma. And I'd now like to turn it over to our facilitator for the webinars, Dr. Dell Gines. Dell is a lead community development advisor for our bank and has done extensive work on entrepreneurship and economic development, especially in minority communities, and has a great, fun, engaging webinar planned for you tonight. So Dell, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Matthew. And of course, thank you, Mariana, for planning these. I'm actually in Oklahoma City right now. I'm actually in our hotel right now off, I can't remember the name of the street. I was telling them earlier about the buffet that I had down the street, one of the most interesting buffets that I had. But it's been great. I wish we could do this in person. We originally had it scheduled to be in person, and then obviously, as you know, public health concerns with the pandemic caused us to kind of, shift it to be a little more health conscious in that regard. But I always like coming down to Oklahoma City. I've been down here a couple times, and we did the webinar this morning, and I mentioned the times that I've been down here, but I forgot the very first time I was actually in Oklahoma City was probably my third year at the Fed. I've been here 10 years, maybe second year, and it was in Northeast Oklahoma City at the community college, and we did the Small Biz Day event that we had started working on for around the region there, and where we convened, all the local small business support providers into the community. And we had a 2-track event, one for startup businesses, one for existing businesses in the community. And so then, of course, I've been here a couple more times. Some of you who are watching this, I've been checking the attendee list and I didn't see anybody that I know on there. But some of you that are watching this may have, heard the presentation when we came down and did a presentation. A couple times we did a presentation on the state of African-American businesses and economic development strategies. And then we did the small business, the Black women-owned businesses research down here. One of the focus groups we did down here, met a lot of wonderful people through that. And of course, we came back after that and kind of presented the findings. And then of course, probably my favorite time down here was when I did the keynote presentation for the Black Chamber event that I'm gonna try to make it, if I can, afterwards for at least a little bit until the end for their mixer, and see if anybody that I know and try to meet some people again in Oklahoma City. So It's been fun time coming down here, and I'm excited to do this presentation. And I know it's the evening time now, so we've had a busy day. So I'm gonna keep this one a little bit lighter. For those of you who watched the one in the afternoon, it was a little more technical. And while I do have a couple numbers, this is really much more of a community-centric conversation, specifically since we're talking about something that is pretty close to my heart based upon my background, where I was raised in North Omaha, Black community, North Omaha, which is Black businesses. So let's, let me see, let me get the share screen up and get this going. Let's see. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes. We can.
Okay, perfect, perfect. So Chad did a good job of giving an overview of the Federal Reserve Bank, which I think is important. And the reason that I do try to introduce it with this is, one, so you can get to know us a little bit better, but two, so you can understand the importance of our regional banks. You know, there's 12 regional banks. We're in the middle. We're the Kansas City Fed. We cover the 7 states in the middle. And the regional nature of the banks are very important because it allows us to more effectively do things like this, to be on the ground, to know what our stakeholders, you know, are interested in, the major concerns of what's happening in the Midwest, particularly our region, which is unique to what you may find on the West or the East Coast. And so with our 7 states and our president, Esther George, as well as our branch executives like Chad and in our other branches in Omaha and Denver, we get an opportunity to really do deeper dive engagement into our communities that we care about. And this is an example of it. You know, I get to come down to Oklahoma City within our region, and it's highly unlikely that you would have somebody from, let's say, New York, if we didn't have the regional presence coming down to Oklahoma City to do these kind of conversations. So this is a little bit of my work. Take a look at it. Some of those that you might find the most interesting are kind of the last 3. The Black Women Startups Business Startups Report is probably my most favorite that I did, because I got to meet so many wonderful Black women entrepreneurs and talk to them. I've talked to over 500 Black women entrepreneurs around the nation, at least at minimum, with that report. It got some good press in Inc. magazine, Black Enterprise, Kansas City Business Journal, CNBC, because people were really interested in what we try to lift up in that, which is the fact, which I'm going to talk a little bit later, how Black women have been starting businesses at a faster rate than anybody else in the nation. And then all these works you can find on the Kansas City Fed website at kansascityfed.org, and go to the community tab, and you can start playing around and seeing all the cool stuff that we do, as well as my colleague Steve Shepowich, Ariel Cisneros, and Jeremy Hagley in our respective other areas. I do small business economic development, Steve workforce, Ariel does community investments, and Jeremy Hagley does digital divide. We're also working on stuff around affordable housing and housing access. So check that out. Most people, we're a secret. We're not. We don't want to be a secret, but a lot of people don't look at the Federal Reserve Bank and realize that we have such an emphasis on the issues of LMI, low moderate income populations. So I really want to talk to you, excuse me, as community members, as friends, you know, and extended family tonight. And I think that's going to make it a little bit unique from today or a lot of the other presentations, because my life has been, especially my professional career, based around Black business. So like I mentioned, I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and most people don't realize this, but Omaha, Nebraska has 13% of their population is Black, just like the number in the United States. And most people don't consider Nebraska as a place where there's a lot of Black people, but in Omaha, pretty major metropolis, it really is. And we've always had a high poverty rate in there. In fact, you know, what I talked about this morning was that at one point we had the highest Black childhood poverty rate in the nation, and the number 3 adult poverty rate in the nation, one of the widest gaps between whites and Blacks in terms of economic prosperity in the nation, next to Minneapolis, Minnesota. And this is the community that I was born in. This is the community that I lived in. When I started my professional career in banking, this is the community that I banked in, like all my banking career. And I started as an in-store banker at a grocery store, which is unique for those of you who ever worked in a grocery store. Then I became a personal banker at Bank of the West, which was Commercial Federal. And then I spent time as business banker, small business and business banker in our Black community at US Bank and Wells Fargo before I came into the public sector and took over an incubator, a small business incubator in our community. And so firsthand, I was seeing, because I was always a community active guy, right? Like I started doing community work in 17. I had my first public access television show in my early 20s. So I was always doing various things to support the community. And really my eyes were open to economics and how difficult it is to generate Black prosperity in the current environment, especially starting Black businesses by being a business banker and being in that space. I mean, the number of loans that I would turn down, the lack of level of high quality information about how to do small business and economic development. Even from the personal side, when I was at Bank of the West, I remember one month as a personal banker, I took 30 loan applications and only got one approved. And so I'm sitting here looking at, how can we ever get ahead as African Americans in this nation if fundamentally we cannot start and grow our own companies and create wealth and assets and all the things that are associated with it? So I come at this from a very personal space. And as I say that, I want you to understand that these views only represent myself and not necessarily the Federal Reserve Bank. And so the reason that I landed on small business is because of its unique power within the United States to help uplift communities, particularly communities like ours. In point in case, recent research came out from the Center of Global Policy Studies that said business ownership has historically been a strong wealth builder for communities of color. Nationally, the median net worth of Black and Latinx business owners is more than 10 times that of their peers who don't own a business. And as I'm going to show you in a little bit, the problem is that we start businesses at a much lower rate. The businesses that we do start are significantly smaller, and we're not creating scale. So I want to get into this part of the presentation. How many of you recognize these guys? So I had my daughter and my niece came up from Texas the other day, and we're going through Amazon Prime trying to find something to watch. And what did we stumble on? We stumbled on Breaking 2 Electric Boogaloo. And I don't know if any of you saw Breaking 1, which was a phenomenal movie from my childhood, but Breaking 2 was not so phenomenal, and it was pretty terrible, actually. And so, in the middle, you got Ozone. On the corner, on the other side, you got Turbo, who are the stars of the show, along with Special K, who's this modern dancer. And so, we're sitting watching this and laughing at how terrible this movie was. And then I got to reflecting, this is what they were doing on this show, minus the breakdancing, exactly the way our communities have been having development done all the way across the nation since integration. And so here's the story. Let me go ahead and flip to the next slide. So this is my guy, Turbo. And if you ever want to watch a super cool dance scene, you got to go watch this and watch where he's dancing on the walls and the ceiling, breakdancing on the walls and the ceiling. And I don't know about you guys, but I was never a great breakdancer. We used to try to go out, take the cardboard boxes and put them in the street and battle people. But for whatever reason, I could never quite get it right. But here's the plot of the movie. I want you to just read this and try not to laugh. A developer tries to bulldoze a community recreation center. The local breakdancers try to stop it. I want to read that again, just because on his face, it's just the most hilarious thing. A developer tries to bulldoze a community recreation center. The local breakdancers try to stop it. And so as you watch this movie, this is the expanded version of the plot. So basically, these kids go and work to teach dance at this community center. This was a dilapidated community center. Nobody wanted it. An individual came in and he took it over for the community. And in the community, he was running all kinds of youth programs to kind of uplift the community, give kids things to do, et cetera, put them on a positive path. And as a lot of these stories go, you had this greedy developer who wanted to come and buy it. And he had the money, he had the resources, he had the ear of City Hall. And what he did was he said, I want this land to build a massive mall on it and to start pushing out the community. You see where I'm going with this? And so he had the ear of the council people, and he was saying, look, they can't even keep it up. It's not with code violations. So the council was going to basically shut it down if they couldn't come up with a certain amount of money to do the redevelopment of the property. And so after a bunch of dance scenes, a bunch of terrible acting, a bunch of bad romance plot lines, ultimately what the community does is they come together, they all throw a big dance, combined with modern dance on stage. They raise the money, they end up saving the community center. Now, that is so like the way a lot of development is done in our communities. Like what you tend to see happen is a lot of our communities become dilapidated, underinvested historically. We have things like urban renewal that happened in the 70s, where the states were and the federal government were putting highways directly through our communities, tearing up hundreds of homes, separating one side of the community from another. And then the city, wouldn't do development. They wouldn't invest in the infrastructure. So we begin to take over properties and do our own thing. And then in a lot of cities, what you end up seeing is, as the property declines and we take it over and we're doing the things that we feel we need to hang on in the community, then all of a sudden developers want to come in because most of our properties are adjacent to downtown and they have economic value, and people want to then turn around and redevelop it, just not for us, right? And so now all of a sudden you have something called gentrification, where the developers come, they build this new property, they start taking all the property, leverage in the city, which was complicit in it because they underinvested in it historically, and now Black people have to move. Right. And this is the plot of breaking when you start breaking it down, no pun intended, breaking it down. And what happens is we've shown no ability to really address that, because the way the economic development system is set up is it's set up for the ownership class, for the wealthy class, and is set up against those that don't have the same level of access or economic development based background. And so this is why I argue from a community standpoint, there's no greater thing that we can do than to start and scale our own businesses, because of the variety of ways that it supports the things that we want to do from an economic development standpoint, from a community development standpoint, to a prosperity standpoint, and all of these things. And it also helps resist, when other communities or other developers want to come in and do something that ultimately is going to either harm the Black community or push us out of our historical community, which we've seen in many instances. So check out Breaking Two. I think you're going to like it. The last time I was at, I did the presentation, the keynote for the chamber, I was able to talk about The Last Dragon with Bruce Leroy. So that's another one you got to check out. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about history, because I don't think we talk about it enough, particularly when we're talking about the history of business. And so I took a couple slides from a presentation that I used to do called A Brief History of Black Business. I just need to set the historical context for why we're seeing what we're seeing today in regard to Black entrepreneurship and Black communities. So this is a slave ship. And, our history absolutely does not start in the United States, and it does not start as slaves. We had tremendous culture and history in West Africa. Some of the kingdoms of West Africa were greater than what was in Europe. But from the American side of things, our history did start like this. And we must never forget this, because we were the only forced immigrant group in the nation that occurred in the nation. And our experiences in our history and the policies that were set up against us are very unique to this nation. And as a result, I argue that the things that need to be done to do development within us are unique. It has to be culturally driven. There are going to be some overlaps and some synergies that we create with other development strategies. But we really have to come together along with our allies and design development strategies primarily by focusing on ownership of businesses and other opportunities that are unique to the Black experience, because our experience and our history is unique in this nation. And I thought this was really important, because Black people have always been part of economic commerce. The problem is that our first experience with economic commerce in the United States was as slaves. And to prove this point and to point this out, this is actually a true legitimate stock chart of slavery. So the slaves were traded on the stock market back in the day. And you can see the escalation of value of slaves in the United States. And so we have always been part of commerce. We've always been part of economic development in the United States. The challenge and the problem is that when we were originally brought over here, it was because we were looked at as more like a machine on somebody's balance sheet versus somebody that can actually go out and have freedom and be able to produce commerce on their own behalf through business ownership, farm ownership, and in the labor market. We were the free labor, we were traded. And we can't forget these things, and it's important that I bring them out. And so when we talk about Black businesses during slavery, we have to realize that not all of us were enslaved at that period of time. And even opportunities originated in the South where Black people could start businesses. So the challenges were the same as today, and it's eerily how much similar it is, even though we have a level, and we're no longer slaves. We have a lot of flexibility and freedom, but we're looking at similar types of challenges in starting businesses as our slaves did. And so when I read this, I think you're going to see where I'm coming from. So most Black businesses were very small and focuses on services and were skilled trades. Black businesses often focused in areas where whites didn't want to work, in areas where there wasn't great competition from whites, often in specialty crafts. In the South, in some instances, slaves hired out their time. There are even instances where Blacks owned small plantations and slaves as well, although this was extremely rare. There were, however, Black businesses that excelled during this area. So I want to stop right there. And if I just said that, and I didn't put it in the context of slavery, and I just read that and I said, hey, Black people today are this, you'll probably say, yeah, I agree. Point in fact. So, and I'm not going to put this data point in later, so I'm going to share it now. So, close to 70% of Black women-owned businesses are within 4 industry clusters, and all of them are heavily service or trade centric. And so we're really looking at the same thing. And while we do have scaled up Black businesses, the majority of our businesses, and I'm going to show you the data on this, are very, very small. They're very, very localized, and they don't have employees. So this is almost a pure equivalent to what we're experiencing in our business environment today versus business during slavery times. Now, the uniqueness is obviously we can start more businesses, we can be mobile, we can do other things to accrue capital that our ancestors couldn't, but we're still reeling from the same effects that our enslaved forebears had. And so I do want to point out a couple of pretty interesting folks. So Thomas Jennings was started as a free Black living in New York, and he actually started a dry cleaning business and was thought to have the first patent for an African American in the United States. And it's interesting that he used the money that he made with his new process to purchase freedom for his family. And then we have William Leesdorf, who most people don't even know, but he was noted as the father of California and often thought to be the first Black millionaire in the United States. And in 2011, he was recognized as the African founding father of California. And he launched a steamboat business in San Francisco, which is how he made his living. And so you had those that were enslaved or those that were in the North who were not allowed to own businesses, those that were allowed to, and turned mostly into the service businesses. And then you had those outliers, like these 2 individuals that I mentioned, but particularly William Leesdorf, like we see today, like we'll see an Oprah and we'll say, wow, Oprah's a billionaire, but that's an aberration. That is not the norm. But the fact that it did happen. But some really interesting things, because I've said that, Black people have entrepreneurship in our DNA. When you look at the innovation and creativity, the things that we have not had really has been the systemic support, which I call the ecosystem around us, to really create scaled up businesses that create commerce. Although we have seen that in certain areas, which I will talk about. But this is some really cool numbers, and I don't think a lot of you know this. So in the 50 years between 1867, the Emancipation Proclamation, in 1917, businesses increased from 4,000, Black businesses increased from 4,000 in the nation to 50,000. This is a 1,150% increase in 50 years. So coming out of the most desperate times and desperate environments, the entrepreneurship spirit of Black people in the United States exploded in the nation, leading to a massive growth in small businesses. And during the same period, roughly the same period, 1888 to 1934, over 124 Black banks were created. To date, we have, I believe, less than 20 Black banks still in existence in the United States. Maybe it's low 20s. I haven't looked at the number recently. Now, how were these banks created? How were these business funded? It was very much a communal centric thing when we first started. And a lot of the money was pooled through the churches because we didn't have early access to banks and other opportunities, which then served as a hub for a lot of things to turn around in a very community centric approach to funding ourselves to be able to go out and do these ventures because we couldn't get it early on in the regular market. Then, of course, during Jim Crow, there's somebody that hopefully most of you know, which is Madam C.J. Walker, Sarah Breedlove, who was the first female millionaire in the United States, not first Black female millionaire, but the first millionaire. And she had a hair care line, which was very innovative at the time. And she went all over the nation and even all over the world internationally, creating these products specifically for Black women. And not only that, but she would train other women on how to build their own businesses and gave lectures across the nation. So she gave back. There's a big trend. When I was doing the original, presentation research for this, what was always consistent was that the entrepreneurs that were successful always tended to give back and support their community in a major way. It wasn't just about them. I think that's something that we also need to keep in mind. During civil rights, you had a lot of different entrepreneurial ventures going on that were coming out of the Jim Crow era. But one of those that I do want to lift up is A.J. Gaston, who at one point was thought to be the wealthiest Black man in America. And he was instrumental in the civil rights. He paid the bail for Martin Luther King. He supported a lot of that particular movement. And he was just a tremendous entrepreneur who was really supportive of the community as a whole. When we get to post-civil rights, you had Reginald Lewis, who was very interesting, died way too young of, I believe it was a brain cancer, if I remember correctly. But he was the first Black billionaire in the United States, and he did it off the backs of real estate. But we had and have a lot of problems. And these are some things that I want to point out to you, because this is the time which we're still living in. We have not found a way yet to recover ourselves from what happened during integration. And while by many accounts, integration was a wonderful thing because it allowed us free mobility in the United States, it also significantly damaged our communities from an economic standpoint because we didn't have the infrastructure necessary to be able to compete in the broader market. So this is an interesting quote. It said, "Integration became the greatest opening of domestic market in American history, but the windfall only went in one direction. In this way, integration wiped out or humbled an important segment echelon of the Black community, the non-clergy leadership class that fought so hard for civil rights and was needed to show the way to pragmatic prosperity." So in a sense, Walmart affected our community. So what happens when Walmart comes into a small rural community? What happens is, because of their greater competitive power and the other factors that they bring to that, they tend to run out a lot of the other small businesses that just simply can't compete with them at scale. And this is the same thing that happened to a lot of our businesses within our community when integration occurred. This is from a great professor. He's right up the drive into Wichita, Robert Weems, and he writes in his book, he said, as Blacks begin to explore new opportunities outside the boundaries of the African-American community, Black-owned businesses, which historically were based in African-American neighborhoods, found themselves increasingly marginalized. Moreover, African-American businesses appear totally unprepared to deal with this changing social economic reality. So again, the Walmart effect of what happened when integration occurred, and now competition had to be done through the business marketplace from a national level. And you had a lot of greater resource whites, along with other things like I mentioned urban renewal. You also had things like redlining, where they wouldn't lend in our communities. And it did a whammy on our Black business environment that we never recovered from. And I'm sure that a lot of you will you talk to some of the older people pre-integration or right near the beginning of integration, and they'll talk about how there were so many businesses that were local within their community that they would go to, the business, corridor, or the barbers, not just the barber shops, but like your five and dime stores, all of those things, as well as your doctor, nurses, all of these other things that were local. And you really had an economy in many Black communities that, even though it may not have been that strong, you could see visible evidence of the entrepreneurial spirit. And that became decimated during the integration. And we still have not figured out a way to recover that, but that's why we're kind of talking today. So let's move a little bit to the only data points that I really have. And this is the same data that I kind of showed this morning, but I do want to point it out to those that are going to be watching this one and not the other one. And so this is kind of from the most recent county business patterns. And what I kind of wanted to do is kind of point out the disparities in business ownership between, non-African Americans or African Americans and other BIPOC communities and whites. And so when you look at it, and the reason I start with employer-owned firms is because of a few things. One, obviously, they're the ones that are producing jobs. They're the ones that tend to have the most revenue, and they're the ones that, even though there are fewer of them, they tend to have outsized economic impact in Oklahoma City as a whole and in our Black community. So we look at it, out of the 15,000 total employee-owned businesses, 12,000 of them were white. Only 334 Black businesses in Oklahoma had even one employee. So we need to kind of really think about the implications of that. And I'm going to show you another number that even expands on that. And so here's a different kind of look at that same number. So the white population represents 66% of the Oklahoma City population, yet they have 77% of the employer-owned businesses. Black people represent 15% of the Oklahoma City population, but only have 2% of all the employee-owned businesses and only 1% of the employees. And I argue that this is a systemic ecosystem problem where we don't have the things put in place from a cultural standpoint, from a resource standpoint, from a network standpoint, and other factors that we have to look at as a whole. And we have to put that together and say, how then do we raise this number? So this is the one that I really want to draw some attention to because it's really eye-opening. So I went back to the most recent data, which was from 2012. And here's what it shows, that out of all of the firms that they have, so let's say every firm, whether it has employees or not, every business, whether it has an employee or not, 74% of white-owned businesses have no employees, and 26% of them have employees. However, when it comes to Black entrepreneurs, 94% of them have no employees, and only 6% of them have employees. And so when you look at that number, which is the greatest disparity amongst any race or ethnic group, you have to say that something is very, very weak within our business environment that is not allowing our businesses to start and scale outside of just being a solo owner. Just a quick divergent side note, we know that Black businesses got hit much harder during the pandemic with higher closure rates. At one point early in the pandemic last year, it came out that 40% of all Black businesses had shut their doors for a period of time. Of course, they're going to reopen. That's what we do. Coming out of the 2008 recession, Black businesses actually, and minority businesses as a whole, people of color businesses, actually produced more net new jobs coming out of the Great Recession in 2008 than any other ethnic group. So we know we can do it, and we know we're going to bounce back. And so here's the importance. So if you kind of look here at the Black or African American, we still have significant disparity. So I take out all firms because that's like your super major corporations. But if we look at whites, the average white self-employed firm from 2012 generated 2.8 million on average. The average Black firm was 1/4 of that, roughly 1/3 of that at 750,000. But here's the disparity. Look at the difference. So when you look at the numbers, we only generated $41,000 on average with, oops, I'm sorry, skipping around. We only produced $41,000 on average for average sales, right? So when you average all of the business out, employers or non-employers, the average sales for a Black business in Oklahoma City during this time period was $41,000. That's barely more than what an individual would make working even a basic job, right? So we have to look at it like that, that the businesses without employees only made $18,000. So there's a lot of work that we have to do, and we have to consider how we're going to do it. And to me, that has direct implication towards this number. So this is where the household income distribution, meaning how much a household earns in a given year. So in 2019, 48% of all Black households earned $30,000 or less. That's almost half earned less than $30,000. That's a tremendously challenging number, especially when you're trying to secure your community, create a healthy environment, and to provide for your kids and leave a generational wealth, right? And so you can look at the other ethnic groups. And I had to run this number twice because when I first ran it, I'm like, man, this seems so extreme compared to other ethnic groups. But I ran it twice and the number still batted out. And I'm like, to me, this is the direct correlation to our entrepreneurial rate and the fact that we are just not producing the kind of entrepreneurship. And so here's the question as I wind down to the third and final part of this presentation. How can the majority of our Black communities across the nation, the Black community in Oklahoma City, create wealth and opportunity for our children, create high quality community environments, and have broader influence over how our communities are governed and controlled without better entrepreneurship and small business ownership? I argue that you can't. And I'm going to just, do a straight up conversation on some of the things that I think that we need to do to make this happen in our Black communities around the nation in Oklahoma City. One, we need to make entrepreneurship a community priority. Trust me, I'm a community guy. Like I told you, I've been doing community work since I was 18. I still work with an organization called Black Men United. I teach, I do reentry for the work, training. I go into the prisons. I work with the kids that have been convicted as adults, predominantly kids that look like us. I do programs for low-income people through my volunteer service still. And so I know all of that. I know the anti-violence scene. I know the social justice scene. I know all of those. I know your hoteps, your conscious community. I know, the bourgeois. I know the conservatives. I know the liberals. I've been in there, been in all and do it all. And the number one challenges that we have is we have not made entrepreneurship a priority. So it's not that it's not there, but we look at things like, okay, we got to focus on social justice and do prayer walks. I'm not against prayer walk. My first degree was in Bible and business. I don't know how those two things mix. It was a dual major. but it was from a Christian college. So I know the ministry world, right? And I'm not against that stuff. I'm not against the power of faith and faith institutions. I'm actually for it. But when we look at the things of social justice, of marching, of addressing all of these factors that are impacting us in a given day, what is happening is that we have so much noise around it that we've lost track of the fact that if we cannot have economic control of our environment, everything else that we try to do within the social justice, community service support, anti-violence, all of this other, it makes it so much more. Always have to go outside of ourselves to ask for philanthropic dollars or city support to do the things that we feel like we need to do on our own. And we can't do it unless somebody else is writing us a check, right? So there's a philanthropic angle to this. There's a community development angle. We cannot employ our own kids. We cannot build the things that we want to build within our own community. We always have to go outside of ourselves. So we need to make entrepreneurship a priority. This doesn't mean that we stop the other things. It just means that we lift this up as a feature of what we're going to do moving forward to make sure our communities are healthy, safe, and vibrant. We need to leverage our collective voices for better entrepreneurship policy. And this is very consistent with what I just said, but this is specific for those of us that are entrepreneurs or in that space. We can't simply, and by the way, this is an old retouched up picture, which is really cool, of the Negro Business League from Booker T. Washington that he created and leads across the nation back in the early 1900s. And so when we look at, are we actively participating in these policy conversations? Mariana talked at the introduction of this about all the things that are coming down. In Omaha, we just now started talking about how do we leverage some of this American Rescue Plan money that's coming down to address issues of the pandemic. There's other things, and I'm not going to throw out all these acronyms, but there's a lot of money now coming to the states to support communities as a whole that we should be looking at, and states as a whole that we should be looking at how we can leverage that to begin to empower our entrepreneurship and do better economic development in our community. But it takes a coordinated voice. That's how policy decisions get made. We cannot simply think that that our policymakers are going to be benevolent and understand what we need unless we go to them and say, we need money for capital. We need money for physical development. We need money for education and training, networking, and all the things that go into building a vibrant entrepreneurial community. We got to pay particular attention to Black women. And I got a little bit of pushback on this from some of my Black males. And I'm not saying that we don't focus on Black male entrepreneurship, because we absolutely need to. But right now, it's clear that there's a significant energy that we need to capture around Black women. And we need to put an environment around them. And what they need is entrepreneurs to help them scale. This came out of the Black Women Report. And here's the reason why. And these are all, by the way, these are all Kansas City entrepreneurs, and these two ladies were the ones that gave me all the pictures to put into the guide, so they're super dope. So the rise of Black women entrepreneurs. Black women from 2002 to 2012 created 1 million businesses. Hispanic women created about the same amount, but the biggest difference is Hispanic women had tremendous population growth. Black women growth was flat. So if you really break down the numbers, nobody was even close to creating the same amount of business as Black women by any race or gender within the nation. Right now, 1/3 of all women-owned businesses are owned by Black women. They created 1/3 of all the new businesses, and they created one out of every 5 of all businesses during the same time period. So Black women were killing the game when it came to entrepreneurship for a variety of reasons, some positive and some negative. But the greatest challenge is that the average sales of a Black woman-owned firm is the lowest out of any race or gender group. Because of the same things that we talked about, we have not put a supportive environment around them. So all of this energy that they're showing is not being matched by the broader community, both the Black community and the broader community of Oklahoma City or any city or state as a whole. And so I say this, if Black women averaged generating $27,000 a year in sales, what would happen if we could even get them up to 100,000, or I'm sorry, if we can even get them $10,000 more in sales on average in a year? So multiply, and I can't do the math in my head, multiply 10,000 times 1 million businesses. That's a pretty significant number, not just for the Black community, because in many instances, Black women are the economic engines of the household, and also they are the role models to their child. But imagine $10,000 more going into the community to revitalize the community, to build wealth, because Black women have demonstrated a huge community commitment with their businesses, and also what it would do to whatever economy of any city that they were living in. So we need to prioritize them, but by building a better ecosystem around them, we don't just build the capacity of Black women, by extension, we build the capacity of Black male businesses as well. So these are some things that we need to think about. We need to think about our untapped community assets. One of the things that was interesting that came out of Black Women Startups report is that a lot of Black women, well, first of all, Pew research showed that Black women were the most religious group in the nation. And where do most of them get their religion, or where most of them do with their religious opportunities? They go to a Black church or some other kind of local affiliated church. We're not tapping into the historical power of the church. And not all of this is the community's fault. I think in a way, the Black church has been trying to find itself since integration, since they had so many different roles to play pre-integration. Like we talked about, they were the ones that were aggregating revenue, that were the political leaders. After integration, a lot of that changed. But I still think that it's an untapped community asset. So we know that Black women are starting the businesses the fastest. Many of them, they say they get inspiration from their faith-based institution. What would happen if we can get our pastors on board to really do robust entrepreneurship support for their congregation? What would be the impact on Black entrepreneurship? Let's start thinking about some of the other organizations. How many of us thought about daycares? Most daycares now have some education or training curriculum. What would happen if we can piggyback on the numerous daycares that are in our Black communities, basic forms of entrepreneurship education for elementary and middle school while they're going in there? So looking at our parent education and our community-based organizations, NAACPs, urban leagues, how many of them are robustly seeking to develop entrepreneurs? Yet they're historic in our community, even though some are better and some are worse, they still have a brand name recognition. What if we can give them to significantly pivot to prioritize entrepreneurship? And we could go down the list of the untapped community things that we have in our community that we could use to actually support the development of entrepreneurship across Black communities. Imagine what would happen if we could begin to align these things and really prioritize the creation of entrepreneurs and ultimately the creation of wealth and the control of the space and economic engine of your community. And then finally, before I close, and if there's any questions, since we're at 6:22, we can take them. We have to believe that it can be done. One of the things Chad didn't mention when he did the introduction was the fact that we just released an article on Black Wall Street, Greenwood, Oklahoma, in commemoration through the Federal Reserve. And so I had heard about it, obviously, because I've been in the economic space, but I kind of heard about it from a distance, right? And so this article forced me to really do some deep diving and research into how it came about. And I'm not going to regurgitate all of that because a lot of you probably know it. And if not, we can always send you the link to the article for the little bit of history, or they're doing some great documentary on it now. But here's one thing that staggered me when I really stepped back and thought about it. So O.W. Gurley, he came in 1906 is when he started Black Wall Street. He purchased the land, he subdivided the land. He said, I wanted to build it to create a independently controlled Black economic city and environment, right? Which he did. The commemoration of Black Wall Street was 2021, which means that it was destroyed the first time in 1921. Now I want you to do the math on that. So we're celebrating Black Wall Street as one of the historically greatest achievements of Black economics in American history. But when you do the math, because I just told you he started in 1906 and it was destroyed in 1921, all of that economic energy and growth happened in 15 years. And so this happened immediately after slavery. And admittedly, there were a lot of factors that contributed to that from a policy standpoint, from a Black entrepreneurial energy standpoint and migration. But the point that I'm trying to make is that these things don't take the amount of time that we think it'll take if you have alignment around the various factors of community, of policy, of energy and engagement. And there's so many opportunities out there in different spaces to do entrepreneurship in different dimensions, from technology, new technology, from old school businesses, Main Street, from independent solopreneurs. All of them are there, and all of them are opened up for us to do and achieve as Black people. But we have to put the environment around us. We have to put the energy around us, and we have to set a vision for ourselves. And we have to demand that in the policy environment, in the broader community environment, outside our communities, that they make acceptable decisions that support the things that we need to do. So I encourage you all, as we end this presentation, you can always grab me if you need me, email me, hit me up on social media. But let's really begin to advocate for entrepreneurship, because it is one of the clearest pathways out of poverty, community growth, and control. And with that, I will open it up for any questions in these last 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Dell. I appreciate, again, even specifically for this webinar, the historical context the data and how you really helped us wrap our brains around strategy, prioritization, and coordination, and how we can collectively create bottom up, top down, supportive and resource rich environment for diverse entrepreneurs to lead that will benefit not only our unique communities, but the economy as a whole. One question I see from Dejan Jones is, how can we teach more on the language of money?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think our public schools are going to do enough robust education in that regard in the short run. So I know we've had expansions and things like DECA. We've seen more entrepreneurship training, but I don't think it's still interwoven deeply enough so that our kids are going to get what they need to understand how that stuff works. And now I'm older, but I use myself as an example, and I used to ask this all the time. So I was one of the top 10% academic African Americans in the nation when I came out of high school. Never, not one, this is honest truth, not one time was I ever taught I could own a house. I was never taught what credit was. I was never taught what financial management was. And I definitely wasn't taught that I could own a business. Not one time. It wasn't even hinted at to me. And so here you have, one of the most academically talented kids coming out of high school, and they were steering me into the labor market. So how many of our other kids have had that same, vacuous experience of not learning how to do these basic things that are fundamental to what makes America work? And so I think we need to create better para-educational institutions. And this is why I was talking about leveraging the other community assets that we haven't tapped for entrepreneurship. Churches got to get involved. And I know there's different feelings on them. And some people, say when you say church, Black church, they're like, oh, let's not try to go there. But they still are our thing. They still are a backbone network in our community. Daycares, tremendous opportunity through daycares. Some of these other after school programs. If we can't get it done through the public education system, then we need to piggyback onto some of these other institutions that are touching our kids on a day-to-day basis. And our kids are brilliant. Like anytime you put kids in an innovation, our Black kids in an innovation or entrepreneurship setting, the things that they come up with are phenomenal. This is another quick story, and then we can get to the last question. So I used to do something called Men of Honor, and they used to bring all these predominantly African-American Latino young boys, high school age. And I used to do this game that I created, and I would give them like 3 things that they could create a new product of. And then we had this to show them how to do it. They had to go out and they had to sell it. And then I showed them how to recycle it. The money was candy. And so they would be selling it. And it was a really cool little design for this conference. And so one of the kids came out, because I think it was a shoe. It was like Bruce Lee, and it was like an iPhone, and they had to combine them, and they had to create a new product. And so one of the kids came up with something called the iShoe. The iShoe was one of the groups came up with the iShoe. The iShoe was a product that, would be able to, through an application, would be able to measure how much you walk, how high you jump, all of these other factors of your athleticism. And so I thought that was like really cool. Do you know, literally, this is a couple of years ago, 1 month later, LeBron James came out with a shoe. Nobody else knew it was coming out. That did what? It's connected to an application, measured some of your athletic activities, right? So they were thinking about this ahead of the curve. The problem is that we've given them no vehicle to express that. We tell them either, hey, don't do drugs, don't be violent. We tell them, stay in school, go get a job, all of which are good. None of it's bad, but we're not telling them, wow, all of this innovative potential that you have, you could potentially be a great entrepreneur. And here's how, and here's the system of support in our community that's going to help you get there. So that's a long-winded answer to that. But I think that's one of the things we have to begin to think about, is how do we piggyback on other institutions that are touching our kids on a regular basis.
But to your point, the assets, the leadership, resiliency is there. It's how you nurture that and create vehicles for it to have impact. Clarence, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. This is Mr. Dr. Gines. You had mentioned that I should go and try to get the support of the community as far as fundraising for my school and gym. Okay, well, the fact of the matter is I have gone to the committee and told them that I'm doing research on grants. I have a binder that I have put together of a number of grants that I think the school qualified for. the owner of the property came by yesterday, gave me the purpose of the Constitution and the bylaws of El Overture Historical Center, LLC. That's where the school is located. And I guess my question is, when I'm reaching out to OU, and actually what I really need is support on writing a business plan or a business proposal, okay? And if you would, man, if you give me a call, man, I certainly would appreciate it, because I do not have the time to get to try to pick your brain with this little time span that I'm working with.
Yeah, let's do that, Clarence, because I'm more than willing to chat with you about it, and in a time where we can have a more in-depth conversation.
Great, I love you for that. Thank you very much. And
yeah, Mr. Ellis, I just sent you my email. There are a couple of resources, local resources I'd like to plug you into. So please give me a call or email me.
Oh, yes, ma'am. I thank you very much, Mrs. Adams, and I appreciate the information.
Of course. Thank you for joining us. Okay, well, with that, we've already taken a little bit more of you all's time. I appreciate you all joining us. You know, as just to conclude, when we think about inclusive economic development, it really does require us to address widening equity gaps that persist even as the economy grows. And we know that when opportunities are available in a community, there is a greater likelihood, based off of what Dr. Dell just said, of having inclusive benefits that flow throughout that community and benefit our city and our economy as a whole. So please stay engaged with this conversation, continue to follow Progress OKC, get plugged into what Dr. Dell is doing for the region. And we just thank you all for sharing your time and giving us your attention tonight. Have a good night. And again, the Black Chamber is over at Kindred Spirits until 7. I'm actually going to head that way. So please join us if you can. If not, until later. Have a good night. Bye.